Hello and welcome, everyone. Today we're going to be talking with Susan Chapman, who's a marriage and family therapist committed to transformational community building. She's also a Buddhist teacher, a wife, a mother, a grandmother, who has unique experience in this lifetime of living in several transformational communities. We're going to be talking with her today and hearing about her work as well as her life and her new book, which is going to be coming out this year, the working title, which is 5 Powers of Mindful Communication, a subtitle, Lessons Learned in Hidden Places. Welcome, Susan.
Thank you, Juanita. It's wonderful to be able to talk with you.
Yeah, I'm very excited to hear more about your work as well, Susan. Did I get that working title correct of your book that's coming out?
Yes, Powers of Mindful Communication. Then subtitle, The Lessons Learned in Hidden Places.
And that's coming out later this year, isn't it?
I don't have an exact publishing date. I'm going to meet with the editor next month, so I'm imagining that the earliest it would be the fall or even after Christmas.
Okay. Susan, I'm wondering if you can just help us get to know you a little bit better by talking a bit about your background. I know that certainly when I was reading about your work and especially about the places where you've learned, me being a lifelong learner, I was just looking at all the places, your educational background and your experiences in your life, and just wishing that journey had been mine. If you want to just talk a bit about the kinds of places that you've been learning in your life.
Well, it's interesting because recently I decided I wanted to do 11 art projects this year, and project would represent a stage of my life. And when I did that, I noticed that the stages always alternated, that there was one stage that would be a very intense kind of coming together, and then there would be a stage of falling apart. So that's unusual for people. But I think what I have come to realize is that I've had some very rare opportunities that most people don't have. And the first one was to spend my entire, you could say, formative years from grade 1 to grade 12 in the Convent of the Sacred Heart, which is a very progressive community of women who were intensely dedicated to their own spiritual development as well as educating children, little girls, and giving them the best of all education. So we got a classical education with philosophy and psychology and theology, and at the same time we were in a community where we had an opportunity to know what spiritual transformation felt like on an everyday basis. And
right.
That really was formative in developing my views about mindful speech, for instance, and just how we relate to each other as a way of transforming our experience of relationship.
Yeah.
So for me, that was a very powerful experience. And then in my late teens, I had sort of the falling apart of all of that, which is also very helpful, I feel, in the long run. And then I reconnected and started to work very closely with a spiritual teacher, a Buddhist master, Chogyam Trungpa, who had recently come from England. And he worked very closely with artists and psychologists and really kind of did not emphasize a religious approach, but much more integrating into society this transformational view that he brought with him from Tibet. And I worked very closely with him until he died in '87. Part of that was I took a master's degree in Buddhist and Western psychology, and my second kind of transformational community experience was spending a 3-month period in retreat with my classmates. And we went into a very intense study of the 5 basic energies or the 5 basic wisdoms in contemplative psychology, which are based on the elements, space, earth, water, fire, and wind. And so out of that came some of the seminal ideas that I developed later, which are now called the 5 Powers. And then again, that kind of fell apart, and I ended up moving to Alaska and was working up there as the clinical director for a domestic violence program. And that led me to working in a maximum security prison And I developed a community within that prison, which I write about in my book as an opportunity to really see what's possible in this so-called hidden place of the prison when people can be really authentic and vulnerable with each other. So that was part of my experience. And then finally, my husband and I went to Gampo Abbey, and we mentored with Pema Chodron for 9 years.
Oh, yes.
So we lived in a very intense spiritual community that had, again, sort of precepts and guidelines for how you speak to each other as being the key for how we actually transform our society. So those are some examples of how my life has followed this particular path of looking for what is it that human beings need to have an opportunity to do in order to move away from what I call the paradigm of me first, which is a complete misunderstanding of who we are, into the more profound and accurate paradigm that I call we first.
Okay. Wow, those are really unique learning experiences. Basically, you moved into transformational communities and lived it.
Yes.
And yeah, in many ways, very lucky to have them. Those are the experiences that you also pour into the kinds of workshops, and you actually are creating experiences for other people now based on your own learnings.
Yes, exactly. One of the things when I was living in Cape Breton at Gampo Abbey, I really had a feeling that in the next 10 or 15 years, people would be experiencing a very profound kind of falling apart of the kind of economy and things like that. And I thought the best thing that I could do would be to create what I call stem cells for awakened society, and that these little stem cells would be what I call small green zones. And it would be places where people could experience the kind of transformative atmosphere that I had experienced. And that all they needed were three things. One is the intention or the information about an alternative way of being together. And the second is they needed an opportunity. I realized that, it doesn't happen just accidentally. You have to create an opportunity, like a mini retreat. And then the third thing that they needed were skills or some kind of a protection so that they can go deeply into discovering something more authentic. And so that's where I developed this model of the three lights, green, red, and yellow, as a method for, giving people that experience.